So can we come now to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is the proposal for a regional fuel tax, and welcome Teresa Stratton to the table. Just to acknowledge to councillors, today may be a rather long day. We have got a very heavy agenda. Encourage people to keep their comments reasonably concise, but I know that you feel passionately about some of these issues and will want to speak to them. Can I just put the motion on the table by moving the motion, which is to approve the regional fuel tax proposal and to delegate to the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and CFO responsibility for minor edits, seconded by Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore. And Teresa, would you like to speak briefly to the paper?
So just, councillors, just a very quick overview just to introduce the item. So just by way of reminder, the regional fuel tax proposal proposes to raise $150 million of revenue per annum, or $1.5 billion over the 10 years. The proposal contains 14 projects, and basically those form all of the discretionary projects that AT will deliver over those 10 years. Without the regional fuel tax, the program consists of renewals and already committed projects. The draft proposal was approved by yourself for consultation on the 30th of April, and we ran a 2-week consultation period from the 1st of May. The consultation was run in conjunction with the Regional Land Transport Plan, and between the two consultations there were over 17,000 responses. With regard to the regional fuel tax component of that, there were 2 questions. The first question effectively looked to see what the public thought about a regional fuel tax, and there were about 14,500 responses to that. The overall responses showed that 51% of people did not support the regional fuel tax, 42% did, and 7% other. There were a reasonably significant number of pro forma submissions in there, over 1,700, and the chart on the right shows what the proportions look like without the pro formas. So 48% support, 44% did not support, and 8% other. Just by way of interest, when we asked the same question through the long-term plan consultation, the without pro forma proportions of the results were almost identical to the chart on the right there. They were 48, 43 and 9, so 48 for, 43 against and 9 other. The second question on public feedback asked the public for their relative importance of the projects in the submitters' minds. So very important, moderately important or not important. And the chart up there shows how projects came through overall. Of interest is that those that had a really wide geographic spread had the highest level of support, whereas those that could be perceived to be more local had the lowest level, and that when you look at the breakdown by local board area, it was those areas that knew the project and saw it as being of benefit to that area that supported it the most. So in terms of the key issues that are relevant to your decision making today, the regional fuel tax, as I've already mentioned, is a really key part of funding the discretionary transport investment. Without it, AT's program will look quite small. To get an equivalent level of funding from another source, i.e. general rates, you'd be looking at an additional 10 to 11% rates increase over and above the rates increase you're already contemplating. Or the alternative is to cut the program back so that we just deliver renewals and committed projects, which obviously would have a significant impact going forward. The program of projects that the regional fuel tax supports, that $1.5 billion, attracts direct additional funding to create a program that AT would deliver of an additional $4.3 billion over that 10 years. And of course that's a very key part of the overall ATAP investment, which is $28 billion over the 10 years. The next issue of interest to you is that you did approve a submission on the legislation that's currently going through Parliament to enable this regional fuel tax, seeking a number of things, one of which was the ability to exclude part of the region from the regional fuel tax. And it looks as if that will be enacted, so the Select Committee report has picked that issue up. And at this stage, the proposal has been written on the basis that Great Barrier Island is excluded. And the last issue on this slide here is about rebates. So again, you were very keen to ensure that there were rebates available for non-road use of fuel. And the Minister has written to the Mayor, very supportive of that. So our expectation is that that will be implemented, and NZTA have indicated that they will be putting up an online system that will be user-friendly. So following today's decision, should you approve the proposal, that will be then forwarded to the Ministers of Transport and Finance. We'll also be forwarding a report on consultation that we carried out on the proposal, and that's attached to your agenda as well. We're asking that there's a delegation to the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and CFO for any minor amendments that might arise as a result of today's meeting. And obviously in parallel to this, the legislation is progressing through Parliament and is expected to be approved by the end of June.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Just before we get underway with the discussion, can I acknowledge that Councillor Desley Simpson has lost her voice? So absence of comment from her should not denote absence of interest or desire to speak, only the ability to do so.
Might start throwing things though.
Yeah, we won't encourage that. Look, normally we have questions before comments. I know we've had this paper before us on a number of occasions now. There may not be questions, but if there are questions, can I first give councillors the chance to ask? If not, we can move directly into the discussion. So let me propose that we...
Mr Chairman? Sorry,
Sorry, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. There's two questions. Thank you, Teresa. Pro forma, for lots of people listening might not know what that is. Are you able to just explain that, and also the difference between the two lots of polling we did and this feedback? Have you any opinion, because I know proof's difficult, as to why there's been that slight flip from slightly supporting to slightly not supporting? What might have made a difference?
To pick up the first point first, so pro forma submissions are those where a particular group effectively design the response, often with the opportunity for people to add their own comments, and then that gets forwarded to the council by those individuals based on that, pre-designed response.
So just to that, Mr Chairman, I just want to make sure that the people that did add their own responses were actually included, because when you take out all those pro formas, I'm concerned some of those comments might not have got in.
We did not exclude any of the submissions, councillors, so all of the submissions are included, and all of the comments were picked up as well. So in the more detailed report that you've got attached to your agenda, where we pick up the key themes.
Just wasn't sure if they came out of the pro forma.
Yes. So we didn't treat the pro formas differently in terms of the way they were processed. We've just indicated here for your information what the numbers are.
Thank you. And just that comment about why you think we've come up with a different response.
Well, through you, Mr Mayor, I don't think the response is that different without the pro formas at all. In fact, it's almost identical. So I guess you could say there were more pro formas at the time of the LTP, both for and against. I think primarily this time they were against for the regional fuel tax, and the excise duty obviously became more apparent in that intervening period, but it doesn't seem to have changed the without pro forma figures.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Just reminding councillors this is questions at this stage. Councillor Clow.
Thank you, Therese. The Rodney Local Board came to have passed a local board targeted rate, and they came to us to talk to about it the other day, and of course we applauded their boldness for doing that. It's pretty hard to drill down to see actually what is the road ceiling budget that would come out, but I can see on page 35 under road corridor improvements there is a mention there, and then I'm looking at the Rodney Local Board resolution which they passed in support of the regional fuel tax, indicating 121. Two questions. One, what is actually the road ceiling? Or three questions. What will the regional fuel tax deliver for road ceiling? Where will most of that road ceiling be done, indeed? And then the third one is, if we were to not support the regional fuel tax, what would that mean to the Rodney Local Board targeted rate? Would they have to change their focus from delivering better public transport to indeed use that for road ceiling? There's three questions there.
I might ask Auckland Transport to talk about the specifics of the numbers. My understanding that the road ceiling budget that's in the RLTP is not entirely regional fuel tax dependent in terms of the specifics, but should there be no regional fuel tax, then that would make a big difference to the whole program. So, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Cynthia.
Oh, sorry, Cynthia. Right.
Through the Chair, Councillor, I'm just having a look at the page that you're looking at, if I can first.
So it's the road corridor improvements. We haven't got a specific number yet.
So, Councillor, we haven't put a number in there exactly against seal extensions at this point in time. Through the work that we've done on seal extensions in the Rodney area, most of the seal extensions will not progress. A component of them will not progress. I shouldn't put a percentage on them because I don't know exactly what it is, but a component of them will not progress if the RFT is not approved.
And most of the road sealing that needs to be done is in which ward?
Rodney,
Yeah.
Councillor.
And maybe Teresa, just the third question, if you could answer that. I mean, because this is from what the local board gave us feedback. Would they indeed have to reprioritise their local board targeted rate and what it's been used for?
Yes.
Yes, so what the Rodney Local Board have indicated is that if the road ceiling budget stays in the RLTP, which is dependent on the RFT, then they would divert their money to public transport related projects, but should that not be the case, they would put it back into road ceiling.
Okay.
Michael does know what the numbers are in the road ceiling budget.
So the amount in the base budget had $12 million. The RFT provides for an additional $24 million of road ceiling, and then the RLTP additionally provided another $85 million of road ceiling. So total in the draft RLTP is $121 million of road ceiling, and yes, that's I think someone said the top 98% of projects or something are in Rodney.
In the Rodney. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Sharon Stewart.
Thank you. Yes, that was a good question from Councillor Cooper about the pro forma. I just wonder, can you just answer me why it was that Auckland Have Your Say, for the public feedback, it only went to Greylin, Newland, Takapuna and Manuera?
My understanding, Councillor, is that because of the really short timeframes we were doing this in, that there was a fairly limited ability to have your say, to have your say events right across the region. So we only had a fortnight, and there was, limited ability to actually organise more.
Were you aware that I actually organised my own Auckland Have Your Say, and Auckland Transport didn't come, and I have to thank the Mayor for actually turning up. And the Auckland Have Your Say meeting that I organised, I actually paid for the hireage of the hall, and the advertising was through Facebook and friends, and I actually got more people that attended my meetings than most of the meetings that were publicly notified and paid for.
Good on you, Sharon.
So thank you.
Good on you, Sharon.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wayne Walker. Wayne?
Sure. Just had a question around the expenditure on park and rides, particularly as it goes to Matiatia, that's Waiheke. So that's an issue that's been raised by Waiheke in terms of the appropriateness of using the regional fuel tax for that initiative as compared to other initiatives on Waiheke. So I just wanted to get some comment from the officer and perhaps an answer around flexibility as it goes to that issue. And I do see it's mentioned on page 12 of the agenda.
Councillor, thank you. The reason Matiatia is in there is because it's an important ollie to the community, and we think it is part of the park and ride program, and we wanted to get all the park and ride program in as part of the transport system. Park and ride's important, and I don't think we could leave Waiheke off. As you know, I visited last weekend or the weekend before, and there's some significant work to make that gateway pretty, is my term, not a technical term. But I think we would be remiss if we left Matiatia out of the program, and it can't get funded if it's not in that RFT program.
Thank you very much for that answer. Councillor Richard Hills.
Thank you, Mayor. And it probably is another question for Cynthia. So, obviously, there's $4.3 billion worth of projects in there with the RFT. What happens if this doesn't pass? What happens to the $500 million on safety and Mill Road and Penlink and the bus priority? What actually will your team do if you don't get this $4.3 billion?
Councillor, I think that's an answer that the CE should give.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor.
Sure.
There's probably two impacts that you should be aware of. In the first instance, there are a number of projects or programs that will not be delivered and or will have a significant impact on the transport network or our communities. I don't think I need to say much more about road safety. I think there's been a lot of dialogue about that, but there are too many people being seriously injured or dying on our roads, and the regional fuel tax facilitates a significant uplift and enables us to make a significant difference to the region. Other things that you may not be aware of are things like city centre bus infrastructure, and that includes Quay Street, for example, and with America's Cup and events like that coming up, you know, it's an important gateway for the region, and it'll be an important part of the city in 2021. Amity, Mill Road, walking and cycling, dynamic lanes, which have been hugely successful in Whangaparoa, and even growth projects. The RFT enables you know, housing growth throughout the region. The second impact, which is probably less visible, is a lot of the projects that we have, well, a lot of what RFT enables over the next 3 years is projects to go ahead which would otherwise not go ahead, or there would be very little improvements to transport in the next 3 years other than the committed projects. And you will be aware that the committed projects actually don't get delivered. Many of them, like CRL, do not get delivered until 2023, 2024, 2025. So it's it funds a program that enables us to keep moving forward with our transport network over the next 1, 2, 3 years. Otherwise, we will not see visible improvements.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's no further questions from councillors. Let's move to discussion of the issue.
Sorry,
I'm
just a
sorry,
very brief
Councillor
one.
Fletcher.
Can officers confirm for how many years has such a tax for Auckland been proposed?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'm not sure my memory is
I think Councillor
that
Fletcher
helpful.
can
It's
assist you
a
with the
very
answer.
long time anyway.
Yeah.
I think it's in excess of 20 years this has been proposed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. I think we'll move to the discussion at this point. I don't think I've overlooked any other questions.
I'll email it to you.
Could I lead off on the discussion, because essentially this is a proposal that is absolutely critical to the budget that we're discussing as a whole. I think the most important thing that Teresa has told us, and Cynthia and Shane, is that without the revenue that this proposal raises, essentially we would be doing nothing more than renewals and projects that we were already committed to. So those who think that we ought to do nothing more, maybe that's a really good reason to vote against the regional fuel tax. But if you believe, as I believe, that the congestion in our city is getting worse to the point of gridlock, and the cause for that is obvious to all of us: 45,000 extra people, 800 extra cars a week on the road last year. But the point that I think Councillor Fletcher was making, years and years of underinvestment in our transport system. And that has an enormous toll. Several of us travel down the Southern Motorway. I know Sir John Walker and I have discussed, we discuss on a daily basis on a Thursday how long it took to get down the motorway because of congestion. We cannot allow our city to gridlock, and that's exactly what we're headed towards. This proposal raises $1.5 billion directly, which in itself is a significant sum of money. But because we get dollar for dollar subsidies or better, and because it unlocks new development and development contributions, this gives us $4.3 billion more to spend over the next decade. And that makes it possible for us to do a whole lot of things. Councillor Stewart, in your area, it's $800 million, I think, going in to busways that will unclog some of those roads in your area and will allow buses to move freely. Your area is one of the least serviced by public transport in the city. Councillor Sayers, I've got your letter that you sent to me. It was an open letter, and this was dated late last year, December, and you raised 6 proactive and practical funding answers, and you said the simplest and the best one of those was a regional fuel tax, and I agree with you, and partly for the reason that you said. We heard, in answer to Councillor Close's question, that this puts another $85 million into sealing roads, predominantly in the Rodney constituency. And I know how much those roads are needed, but I also know that without this regional fuel tax, we won't be able to do even a fraction of that. I think if we look over the shore, and Councillor Darby and Councillor Hills long had the dream of a sky path and a sea path that will enable walk and cycling from the shore to the city. That'll be one of the things that we can fund under this project. Our busways right across the city, our rail lines. If we want to unclog the south to Councillor Newman's area, having a third main trunk, having electrification, having the park and rides, that's critical to what we can do in our city. There's a whole range of projects here. Shane Allison, I want to acknowledge Shane for his commitment on road safety. A 78% increase in deaths and serious injuries on our roads in Auckland in the last 4 years. A 78% increase. And we unlocked $700 million that will go into improving road safety, saving lives, unclogging our hospitals from the huge toll that road accidents have in that area. There are enormous things that we want to do in our city in transport, and this package, because of the regional fuel tax, allows us to unlock those projects and do something to help the whole of Auckland. Every part of Auckland will benefit from this. Now, the question some people have put up, and it's a fair question, well, could we do this in a different way? We could. It would mean a 13 or 14% rate increase this year to raise the same money. I've detected around this table, with one exception, Councillor Newman, no appetite to put rates up by 14%. But we could do it that way. But then I have to ask this question, how fair would that be? In every one of your wards, you have older constituents that never use the roads in peak hour. They are not part of that problem, but they would be paying the same amount as wealthy corporates under our interim transport levy. And is that fair, or should there be an element of user pays and demand management in what we're doing? And I believe, yes, there should be. We could do it, of course, by a congestion tax. And a number of people who said, we're not going for the regional fuel tax, but we would go for a congestion tax, they've got a fair point. It's about demand management. I think we may end up there. But if we rush into that and don't do it properly, as the congestion question report to us said, it will fall over. You have to have public approval. You have to get it right. And I think the Deputy Mayor who looked at the program in Singapore that they're trying to introduce said, and Singaporean ministers have said to me, don't start introducing a GPS system right now. It's hugely costly. It's got big problems in it. Wait till we've sorted it out and then maybe copy us a few years down the track. And maybe that's where we will go. But we're not ready to do it now, but the need is right now. So, councillors, I think it's quite clear that we have to raise our revenue. We have to deal with this congestion problem. At the end of 3 years on this council, if we deny ourselves the revenue to make the vital changes that are necessary, we would have to front up to our constituents and say congestion is worse, it'll get much worse, we'll gridlock, but we don't have the courage to tackle it. And I'm calling on each and every one of you to have the courage to tackle this problem, because it does take courage. Nobody likes paying any more for anything. I don't like paying any more for anything. But I know it's necessary, and I know that this is the fastest, the cheapest, and the best way to do it, and that we must do that. And not only do I understand that, but our constituents understand that. Colmar Brunton did 4,000, a sample of 4,000. Usually with the political polls they do, which are pretty reliable, they do 1,200. This is 4,000. And 52% to 43% said, yes, go for the regional fuel tax. A very clear majority. And that's astounding, because in almost every case that you ask the question, do you want to pay more for something, the default position is no. But Aucklanders have told us, in fact, when we asked the question, should we do nothing, unsurprisingly, 95% said, don't be bloody stupid. You have to do something. You need to act. You should have acted years ago. Councillor Fletcher is quite right. Council has been asking for this for 20 years. We now have a government that's prepared to give it to us. Let's seize that opportunity. And let me say this. I expect more out of government, and they've given us more in the Regional Land Transport Program because we pay our taxes to government. But I don't expect the rest of New Zealand to subsidise us completely, and they won't do it. And if we walked away from this, the government would back away from ATAP. We would be pulling the rug out from under ATAP. ATAP would fold. We would have breached our undertaking to play our role. And that is just inconceivable that we could do that. I want to finish with this last point, and it's a valid point too. A number of people in their answers have said, we're worried about it because of the impact on low-income people. And there's nobody around this table that will suffer from, what does the AA say it is, $2.33 a week? But there are people out there that feel any increase in their costs. And I think about those people. I worry about those people. But what I have to draw to councillors' attention, particularly councillors in the south, is that a package was brought in worth about, I think it was $5.5 billion on December the 17th last year. And on average, for more than 140,000 Auckland families, that package will result in an extra $75 a week. That's real money. That makes a real difference. That's the families package that was brought in. Low-income earners, those with children, another $75 a week, which is far, far more important than what the average cost of this petrol tax may be by a ratio in more than double figures. I think about what the costs are facing our low-income people. It's housing. That's why I welcome extra social housing. I think about people who are students. Some of us have been there, know that you live on a smell of an oily rag. They're getting extra assistance. The elderly with the winter package, they're getting assistance. So yes, we should think about the impact on low-income families, but just as this council made the decision to lift our minimum wage, and the government's doing that across the country, this package directly targeting low-income people is the way to assist those that are more disadvantaged in our community, and to relieve 100% of New Zealand, of Aucklanders, of any obligation to improve our transport system to help a fraction that are suffering from low income is not the right way to go. Targeted and direct assistance to those people are. So I finish on this point. If we decide to reject this package, we will be in a position of doing nothing new. We will be in a position of having totally undermined ATAP, and I would imagine that that would then collapse. And the rest of New Zealand would say, well, wake up your ideas. If you're not prepared to put any skin in the game, why should we? We need to do this. This will be transformational for us. For every one of our wards, we'll get something worthwhile, and I urge you to support it. Thank you very much. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thanks, Mayor. Mayor, I'd like to acknowledge your leadership on this. It takes somebody to tackle these tough issues and have the grit to follow something through like this. It's not easy. While it's been mentioned that the regional fuel tax has been around for 20 years, the former Mayor, Len Brown, dealt with something that was around for 93 years before it got delivered, and that's the City Rail link. Let's do it. On the face of it, this is viewed as a transport enabler, and without doubt it is. And we can see the 14 key project areas there from Mill Road in the south, and I've got some questions about that one, and Penlink in the north. But we've got congested corridors like Lincoln and Lake are addressed. We've got technology that arrives and route optimisation. I've heard councillors talk about the success of the dynamic lanes up there in Whangaparoa. We've got $112 million additional going to walking and cycling. Electric trains gets $213 million. This is additional money over and above other budgets. Eastern Busway going east, bigger investments there. Airport access, massive investment in the city centre and bus improvements right across the region to the tune of about $420 million. These are significant, and I think that it's a night and day difference between having the regional fuel tax and not having it, as you've just outlined, Mr. Mayor. But I'd also like to dwell on the night and day difference in terms of the social and economic outcomes here. This is not just about transport. Transport leads to something, and they are absolutely significant. This regional fuel tax, it allows us to shift gears in a way not seen in Auckland ever before. And we're going to be moving now, with this support today, hopefully, moving into a massive decade-long delivery period. Out of planning for 8 years and into delivery. That's what it's going to be. And that's with the goodwill of Aucklanders who are in the main prepared to pay a bit more at the pump. They are going to get that mobility right across Auckland. And in some ways, it is more important than government's very generous announcements of recent. That the regional fuel tax added to that is going to be the thing that allows the step change and allow Aucklanders, all of us, to reinvent the way we move around Auckland. It will be a total reinvention, delivering what I think will become a 21st century worthy transport system. But Mr. Mayor, I don't want to dwell just on the transport benefits that are very well laid out in this document here today. The regional fuel tax connects people. It connects people to new jobs. It connects them to new learning opportunities, to tertiary institutes or schools that they could not formally get to. They were just out of range. That job on the other side of town was just out of range. Well, now, with a new network in place, a totally new 21st century worthy transport system, it is within range. But what's the really big win here? It is transport, but the really big win in my eyes is the significant contribution that the regional fuel tax makes to unlocking housing.
Absolutely.
It's about housing. And if there's any two crises in Auckland that we've got to address, it's the transport crisis and it's the housing crisis. And supporting this regional fuel tax today, Mr. Mayor, is offering your support, our support, to solving the two big challenges that this council is facing that you've led on: transport and housing. They are inextricably linked. This is not just about supporting a great transport plan today. That has to be supported, but let's get in behind this and give it the grit that you have led with, and start embarking on a massive decade-long plan of delivering not just a great transport system, but great living opportunities for Aucklanders right across Auckland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I astoundingly have no other speakers yet.
Okay, sorry.
Councillor Cooper.
All right then. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
I think this is a tough decision. If you know, I have absolutely looked and heard at what people have said. What's really tricky is, when you look at it, iwi 50-50 support. You know, both my local boards support this, but when I get the latest RLTP results, I mean, the earlier ones supported, it's slightly, you know, it's slightly just near that 50-50 kind of thing again. And I know it will affect some families, but I'm heartened to hear that there will be central government support in that. But I think what there is for me is that a lot of these projects, we've known that we've had to do these for decades. I mean, even in my own area, we're just finishing the Western Ring Route, which was planned over 60 years ago, in 1964, when the North Western Motorway was opened. And we're just kind of finishing that last little bit now, and it'll be finished at the beginning of next year. So that's how long these things take. So a lot of the projects on the list and in ATAP are needed to be done, we've known. But when we weren't amalgamated, none of us had enough money to do it. And that was the issue. And rightly or wrongly, that's why we were amalgamated, because we couldn't get enough money together and enough agreement to actually do these projects. Now we have a unique opportunity with rates and taxes from central government, from the citizens of Auckland, to actually fund these projects and actually get them done. And it's been compounded by the huge growth. You know, we've grown the size of Hamilton in the last 3 years, and everybody's screaming at us, get it done, why don't you hurry up? Well, the issue has been money. So this is actually only a small amount of the nearly $30 billion we need to do this. So 1.5 billion will leverage up to over 4 billion was our contribution, and then the rest will come from central government, 19 billion. And as the Mayor said, if we don't do this, they'll just walk away. So we will forego $19 billion to fix the problems we have in our region. And so from a regional perspective, we're here to make a decision for our regions, but of course we will have our own communities at heart. Why, you know, of course we would. That's where we come from. That's where, you know, where we live. So for me, I want to reassure the people in my ward that, you know, you might be paying a bit more for petrol, but you might not have to sit on Lincoln Road burning up that petrol, idling for 2 kilometres. So you might actually use less petrol in the long run. So it'll kind of be evening out. My people in the ranges, and Councillor Hulse and I have a strong affinity with our people on the coast and in the ranges who don't have public transport, but they certainly use our roads and get to Glen Eden and use the train, and Henderson and use the train. So for them, we also know that there's a lot of safety issues on our rural roads, and it'll be the same in Rodney, it'll be the same in Franklin. A lot of safety issues. And there's a huge chunk of money in here to make our people safer, and that's what I'm going to really strongly advocate. I want that safety. I want the Piha Scenic Drive intersection to be fixed once and for all, not just a few plastic stick-up things. You know, I want us to really grab this opportunity while we can. We're not going to get this opportunity again to do this. So, and the other thing for me is, when we have this money, it frees up money to do other things that we might not have been able to do. It actually allows us to do so much more. So for that reason, you know, rightly or wrongly, whether I get flack for it or not, I think I'm put here to make decisions, and I wasn't put here to just make the easy decisions. I was put here to make the hard decisions too. And for me, yeah, it's a tough decision to do this, but at the end of the day, it actually is really logical. So I do support it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I appreciate your comments on that. Councillor John Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, when I look at the consultation feedback on this proposal, it's somewhat inconclusive, or maybe conclusive in the sense that it's pretty much 50-50. When you look at the have your say, 42-51 against, with the pro forma, without it, 48-44 for it, Colmar-Brunton 52-43 for it, local boards overwhelmingly in support, though probably not visible by shouting it from the top of the rooftops, I would say. So in some respect, the consultation has been of limited value, in my view, because it was made before people knew what the projects were. So that was a massive shortcoming which we didn't have control over, but which I think would have influenced a number of people's responses. I certainly endeavoured to do my own consultation. I was talking to a young guy at Whangaproa BP last night, and he's very concerned what the consequences of the fuel tax are going to be. He has to go to hospital on a regular basis. While he lives locally, he's worried about what that impact will be on his budget. I tried to do my own consultation. I certainly urged people to try and work out how much it would cost them, and in many instances it was certainly going to be a lot more than the $140 that we were indicating on our consultation documents per household. The shame is, as I've said, that the projects weren't there, because certainly the point 39, the notion that this package will provide benefits across all communities, was one that was stressed, and I don't think people have a sense of that yet. I've certainly endeavoured to do it with my ward, and you know, hopefully you won't mind me being just a little parochial just for a minute, but when I look through the Albany ward, and this goes to most other wards besides, I look at the 14 projects, city centre bus infrastructure, there's stuff in there for people from the North Shore and for the students going to university. When I go to the park and rides, there's stuff happening in Hibiscus Coast and out northwest. When I go to downtown ferry, it's helping the Hobsonville ferry, the West Harbour ferry, the Gulf Harbour ferry. Road safety, there's a couple of big dangerous intersections there that are getting addressed. Penlink, a project that they've been trying to get for about 3 decades, that suddenly comes out of the ether, and road corridor, so forth and so on. So when I look at it, it's hard not to conclude that in my ward, and as I said, other wards also, there are significant benefits occurring here that wouldn't otherwise happen. However, I don't go along with some of the understatements or some of the kind of skin in the game metaphors that we've heard before. Aucklanders are going to be paying for those things. So we are going to be paying for it, and we have been paying. It's not as if this is the first thing we're doing. We had under $340 interim transport levy. The house is mortgaged to the max, $8 billion. We can't borrow any more. We're selling off public assets, $600 million over the next decade. So Aucklanders are paying for their transport and their other facilities, and I think we do them a disservice to suggest otherwise. My concern is, and I think the Mayor has alluded to it, that in this scheme the effect runs the risk of being a bit disproportionate in terms of its effects on Auckland as a whole. And along with that, in my view anyway, there's a rather ironic juxtaposition that some of the people most able to pay for it and the ones who have benefited disproportionately for investment in transport in the past will be the ones that will be able to avoid it because they have the best choices with respect of public transport and other active modes. So I think it's important we recognise that, perhaps not quite as bad as the verse from Matthew who talked about those who already have plenty been given an abundance and those who don't have any, even that been taken from them. There is an element of that to this, I think, if we're being honest. Because really, Mr Mayor, for this regional fuel tax to progress in a less obvious, a less dramatic way, it would needed to have coincided with kind of low prices at the pump or declining prices. As it is, it's corresponding with high prices and prices going up. We don't have any control over aspects of that, I admit, but that's the unfortunate reality on the ground. Still, in conclusion then, it would certainly be churlish of me, if not a bit disingenuous, not to acknowledge the range of projects that are going to be delivered and the fact that there has been a real effort to spread them across Auckland, because that was certainly one of my provisos. I would not have been supporting this on the basis that we had large areas missing out. I don't think anyone can really say that. Just final point, Mr Mayor, and perhaps most importantly, if this proposal does get passed here today, it goes to transparency and reporting. There's a brief reference to that of our obligations under the Act of Parliament. I would hope you as Mayor go further than that, that given the extent of what's being proposed here and the effect on Aucklanders, that there be some subcommittee that utilises perhaps the talents of some of our most experienced councillors, like Councillor Lee, like Councillor Fletcher, to make an oversight, to give the assurance to the public that every single dollar that they're paying for at the pump is going to be spent wisely and is going to be monitored. And I put that challenge out to you to choose perhaps some of the people here that will be more determined to do that than perhaps others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We went to around 12 Have Your Say events, and obviously the potential fuel tax was a big item at those. And whether they were in Rodney or Waitemata, Manurewa, or even down in Franklin, there was a division in opinion, and that's shown out in the surveys. But a few things really stick in my mind, and one at Helensville was an elderly couple who said, we'd happily pay for a fuel tax if it enables a better PT service so we can go from Helensville to our hospital appointment on the North Shore. I will remember a person in the south saying, if it enables me to get around with my van to service my trade clients better, I'm happy to pay. And I'm driving he said, I'm driving my van every day, but he loses so much money, congested and tied up, not just on our motorways, but on our arterials as well. Then I was on my home patch down in Waiuku, and a gentleman down there I just called Mr X is not known for his, not known for holding back, shall I put it. Came striding across the room, and I sort of took a step back because I thought, no, Bill, fortitude, be strong. And Mr X came up to me, looked me straight in the face, says, I want to have a word with you about this fuel tax. Yes, Mr X. He says, double it and get on with it. I just about passed out.
How was Kellen?
Yeah. Good point, Al. The point I think that Mr X was making is the opportunity. So you can be in denial and say we're not going to do anything, which is basically what you would end up doing. Or you can look at the opportunity. And it's not very often 150 turns into 430 million. Not very often. And this is an opportunity to us to maximise Auckland public's input to get a far enhanced outcome through work with the government and the far rate and start delivering the first 10 years of the ATAP program. ATAP is a 30-year vision. And to me, that's absolutely critical that we have that vision for our children and grandchildren, that we start delivering the infrastructure, the requirements not just for roading, because this actually unlocks housing, as Councillor Darby has said. It enables a lift in the city's capacity of what we do and how we operate, how we work, but also how we play, and our standard of life and our quality of living. And the safety program, 700 million over 10 years. 690 deaths, is it, and serious injuries we've had in the past 12 months? It's an unacceptable figure. And that injury and that death has affected so many families right across our region. And this is a chance to do something about that. And it's something we must do. Also, it helps lift the capacity of the industry. The roading construction industry needs certainty to deliver capacity for us in the medium and longer term. Councillors, when we introduced the interim transport levy, I spoke about being brave. It was interim because it brought the Crown to the table to prove that Auckland was serious about solving its transport problems. This is definitely stage 2. Maybe stage 3 will be a smart transport system, as the Mayor alluded to, from Singapore. But they've got to land that and make it work yet, and they're not there completely. 2020 they're aiming for. So why don't we just see how they go for a couple of years and then potentially negotiate to get the software off them. We can be in denial, or we can embrace the opportunity to deliver that 43 billion. And I encourage you all to think about your whānau. Think about your grandchildren, whether you have some or not, because this projects that are listed here, this is enabled by this fuel tax in part. It's an important stepping stone on our journey for a better city and including basically a better country. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Al-Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to quote something that you said in your opening address, and you mentioned our low socioeconomic communities, and you said, worry about these people. Your Worship, both myself and Councillor Collins, that's exactly what we've been worried about since the regional fuel tax came and was put on this table. And, you know, we've been to the Have Your Say events, as everybody around this table. And Your Worship, I remember the Pacific one specifically, and they did not want it. The Pacific community that I sat around did not want it. And they said to me there, the reason we don't want it is because where are the benefits for us? It's just another tax on us, but where are the benefits? And I spoke to them and I said to them, look, my little input is around public transport. And Your Worship, that's the key thing for people within the Manukau ward that both Councillor Collins and I represent. It's around public transport because we're struggling, and so my challenge is to the CEO of Auckland Transport is that we need to fix the public transport in our areas and across the region.
Yeah, yeah.
Because our community, Your Worship, they just worry about going from home to their work and dropping their children off at their respective schools. That's all they worry about. And then coming back home and putting food on the table. That's all they worry about. And Your Worship, I really don't know how much of an impact the regional fuel tax is going to be with those families, albeit that the government is putting $75 back into into the family. But Your Worship, I have sat around this table as many here since this Auckland Council started, and public transport is still an issue. It is still an issue. It is not an option for our communities at this stage, because the public transport is not going to the jobs where they have to go outside of South Auckland for those that have to. You know, the jobs, and I'm going to keep on harping about public transport because it is that is the genuine option for our communities, that they know that they can hop onto a bus just down from their home, go to the job where they're earning money for their family to put food on the table. And they can't see the benefits. They really can't. I am the councillor liaison for 2 of our advisory panels. One, the Pacific People's Advisory, and the Ethnic People's Advisory panels. And again, the debate and the discussion we've had around this has been very interesting. And, you know, one of the panels just did not support the regional fuel tax. Didn't. But, you know, this is why we're all sitting here and are going to make the decisions that really are for the region. So, in conclusion, Your Worship, you know, I'm struggling with this. I really am, because of the people that have spoken to me. But with me talking to my fellow councillor around the benefits that we see long term, I will be supporting this, but I want to ensure that in the next few years, or even post the next triennial election, if I'm lucky enough to be around this particular table, I will be making sure that public transport around the Manukau ward and the south will end up being implemented. And I just want to make sure that again with the CEO, and you know, look, it's just so important, because I struggled with this, but I think from a regional perspective it is very good. And you know, congestion charging, one of our local boards, Otara Papatoetoe, sort of mentioned the fact that we need to have a look at other options instead of just the regional fuel tax. So, you know, that conversation needs to continue. But, Your Worship, I will be supporting the recommendation of Taylor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Richard Hills.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think a lot of people think that we around this table don't think through these decisions, or kind of just make them on a whim, or just because the staff tell us to or something. But the last few months I've seen a lot of councillors really angry, and local board members upset. I've seen several councillors in tears over this, whether it's been in public meetings, in their offices, in workshops. I think it is a really, really difficult decision to make. For a lot of communities especially, there's a higher number of people that will be negatively affected by the money going out before the projects come in. But I think we all also know what a privilege it is to be around this table and to be one of very few people who actually get to make a decision like this. So it isn't an easy one, but I think we know the gravity of what we need to do, and that all of us are here for the right reasons, for whatever community we happen to be listening to at the time. And I think it is hard. Last night I was in Birkenhead. It sounds like I was doing a pub crawl. I wasn't. I was having a few meetings that happened to be in different places in Birkenhead. But went from one, saw some of my dad's friends. They were moaning about the fact that it'll cost more for their boats, you know. But they were mostly having a go in a joke, and they sort of said, "But you need to do something." It took me an hour 20 from Penrose. They're all labourers. My dad's a labourer, the same sort of thing. But they are, on one hand, you know, ribbing me over this is the cost, but they also didn't expect me to go into a room and fight for the boat users of Auckland. I went down to another meeting with a group of cyclists from our Bike Kapariki group. They were talking about the fact it's getting harder on the ferries to get on and off with a bike. They were talking about the fact that they now fear for their lives every time they get out on the road, and they were talking about the people. They could name people, friends of theirs who've been hit recently, who've had near misses. They know the people who've been killed. You know, and then you go to I went to, later on, spoke to a group of young people, and they were going, you know, we just need better connectivity around our city if we want to live here. So everyone kind of wants the issue dealt with, and I think on a myriad of views, and I think in everyone's deep down knows something has to be done, and we have to find, like Councillor Cooper said, it's money that's held us back. And I think when I campaigned for election and kind of didn't think I would get elected, so it wasn't kind of in my long-term plan to stand, but a lot of the time the younger people said, can you just sort out the transport and sort out the issues that Auckland seems to screw up time and time and again. Over decades it seems we've planned everything wrong, or we always want to delay things and hope someone else will do it. So I think on one sense when you look at the project list, it's just so obvious with the safety, with the public transport, with the road sealing, with the larger projects which I have heard since I was a kid that need to be done, that haven't been done. It seems obvious. It is going to be hard, and I do also grant that the government is investing in people who need it in different areas. But, you know, of course I'll support this because I just don't know what else is possible. So 4.3 billion, I don't have another way, well, I'm not going to put up an amendment to find out how we can raise that 4.3 billion today. So for me, supporting this actually, you know, we have a $28 billion transport program that is funded for the first time. That's 8 billion more than August last year that we had funded. You know, that's, I can't even imagine that kind of money, really. And most people couldn't. But if we actually get this over the line and start to make change and people can see it, yes, there'll be a lot of orange cones, but people, I think, sometimes will thank us for actually making this big decision, but it will be tough. And I don't think any of us around this table, no matter what decision the people around here make, will vote yes or no based on anything but what they think is the right thing to do. So for me, I think it's the only thing to do, but I want to also thank everyone around here for really thinking it through, and we've discussed it over and over and over, every nuance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. To comply with standing orders, we now have to follow a procedure that involves me adjourning this meeting to enable Councillor Clow to open up the Finance and Performance Committee, which he will then adjourn and we'll come back and complete the debate. I'm advised that that is what is required. So if you can bear with us while we go through the formality in order to keep with the constitutional... No. Let me clarify. We will come back immediately to this debate. I have four other speakers on it, but we just need to follow this procedure. Otherwise, the Finance and Performance Committee meeting will lapse. So I'll move that I'll now adjourn the meeting of the governing body and invite Councillor Clow to open up the meeting of the Finance and Performance Committee.
Right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the opening of the Finance and Performance Committee. We won't even start with apologies, but I'll move that we adjourn that meeting. So Councillor Simpson will not actually affirm it, but she did wave. So all those in favour?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
So I now formally welcome you back to the governing body meeting. I have calls, and I'm conscious that we're now eating into Finance and Performance Committee's time, but I have calls from Councillors Collins, Newman, Wayne Walker and Josephine Bartley, so and Councillor Mike Lee and Councillor Gregg, so and Sharon, we'll just keep going. Okay, Councillor Collins, your call. I'm sorry to interrupt your call.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Momona o whaatulo watu pa i o le atunu I ona tūlanga whaalupe la wa fionga liro mai ava pule nui au kilani ma alo soifua maua. Ia whaatulo watu fōi pa I la silasi wa fia le nei tūlau tai ma alo soifua manuia ma le langi mama. Just wanted to greet you all in the third most spoken language in this great country, Samoan, and I welcome you to take Samoan classes at the Pacific Education Centre. Sir, I've struggled with this issue since it was first mooted, and I've taken lots of soundings, I've had lots of calls, especially over the last little while. People have been ringing me. I've been stopped on the 26th level by a number of people who wanted to have informal chats, asking me how I was going to vote. I didn't actually make my decision till last night when I was at home, actually when we were at St Michael's Church in Remuera. We were attending the confirmation of my niece. And it was there that I went for a little stroll in the freezing cold outside of the church with my wife, and we talked it through, and we talked about how it was important for me to remain true to my values, and I thank good friends around this table who reminded me of that as well. So I've listened to the arguments both today and leading up to this debate, and the logic makes complete sense. I get it. We want to unlock transport opportunities for people in Auckland. We want to see that unlocking impact on housing as well. And so I get it, and it makes absolute sense. But I still grapple with it. Because, sir, prior to coming to this council table, I lectured at a Bible college and a university. And so my safe space, when I'm not sure what to do, is to pick up a book and start reading it. And so I did. I started reading scholarly articles on the following themes: transport equity, equity in transport. And sir, the overwhelming evidence from all of that research, and I can quote where it came from as well: the Victoria Transport Institute, based over in Australia, the Washington Transport Project, the Canadian Research for Social Inclusion with regard to transport, the Perth Public Transport Equity for the Disadvantaged. The research is clear. And it had one consistent, one key, and one cornerstone idea that was always evident in all of the research, and it was this: that these types of regional fuel taxes hit the poorest families the most. So I represent the poorest city in the ward. I'm sitting in between councillors who represent slightly wealthier cities, so wealthier wards. And so I've been asking myself, can I, in good conscience, should I, in good conscience, will I, in good conscience, vote for a regional fuel tax that impacts on the poorest communities the most? I've heard the arguments. Oh, we're lifting the minimum wage. We're going to build more state houses and social housing. It's going to be great for the people of Manukau. But what if you're still at least $5 behind zero? The people of Manukau are behind the starting line.
Yep.
I think today, Councillor Al Filipaina, who is not just my colleague, but a very good friend and someone I trust, I think today we represent the feedback that has come back from our ward. Essentially, we're evenly split. That's where it lands, sir. And so my answer to that question, in line with social equity, in line with transport equity, in line with all the research, there were researchers from the University of Auckland who came to see me yesterday. I love hanging out with researchers because they make me look bright. Their evidence was overwhelming as well. Efeso, this will hit your community the hardest. And so my answer to that question is no. I cannot, in good conscience, vote for a fuel tax that is going to impact the people that put me in this office. And so we're evenly split, just like the feedback we received from the people of Manukau. I want to also welcome the chair of the Mangere Otahu Local Board, who's here today, Le Maunga, because this is an issue we've all been struggling with. The economists have said this is going to impact on us the worst. Yeah, I get it. We want Auckland to fly ahead. I understand that argument. But when you are behind the starting blocks, when you are behind a zero, when you are below zero, this is taking food off people's tables. Of the family that I spoke with just yesterday, who live in a 2-bedroom house, solo parent on Vine Street in Mangere East. That family is saying, Efeso, how do we do it? And people have said to me, Efeso, don't you want to think regionally? Of course we want to think regionally. Our people have been paying their rates and they never push back. Well, it's time to push back. And it's time for their stories, their experiences to be heard. And so, sir, I will not be supporting this regional fuel tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Daniel Newman.
Your Worship, I want to declare right now that I will not be voting for the regional fuel tax, which I judge to be a regressive tax that places the greatest burden on the poorest who can least afford it and who generally have the least transport choice. You know, Your Worship, I signalled my position some time ago. It will come as no surprise to you. And in opposing it, I need to declare that had I been in full control of this budget proposal, we would be anticipating significantly higher property rates, as I prefer to address the budgetary needs via a less discriminatory tool affecting the working poor of South Auckland. Your Worship, I accept the central premise that the Auckland Transport Alignment Project requires a significant infusion of capital as well as consequential operating expenditure. The Mayor has stated the case, and I believe that there is an overwhelming consensus that we need to build an integrated transport network for the 21st century. Now, this is not a debate about the merits of ATAP. Look, there are things in ATAP that I absolutely want. I want Mill Road, however inadequate in my view the staged investment may be. And ATAP is being presented as a package deal. There are some elements within the ATAP that I don't believe are the best solution. Hand on heart, I can't say that I consider light rail to the northwest to be better than the option of a bus corridor. I need to say that, but the ATAP package is being presented as a package deal, and I want Mill Road underway. It is most definitely needed, Councillor Darby, and I too am up for funding it. A hypothecated fuel tax, a tax earmarked for capital projects, is going to be a policy that is going to have a very significant impact on the retail price of petrol at the pump, a retail price that is already affected by things like US foreign policy and the New Zealand dollar. It is not, in my view, an elegant means of addressing Auckland's budgetary woes. I'm not someone who demands expenditure without addressing the income side of the ledger. I believe that the cost of the capital asset development strategy needs to be addressed in part by a combination of a rate increase as well as significant increases in development contributions. And I believe that the best way to address the cost of this organisation is to get politicians as close as possible to the political consequences of their spending priorities, because that would drive an incentive around some of the cost centres within this organisation. I could name a few, but I've only got a few minutes to speak. Your Worship, I come from the South, and I have to speak for the South. And frankly, I defer to the wise words of my colleague and friend, Whaanana Efeso Collins, who said recently, in order for our region to really thrive, to become a world-class livable city, we must ensure we are looking after all our communities, particularly those who have often felt left behind. Well, like Councillor Collins, I intend to vote with my conscience and on behalf of my constituents. I am invited to vote for a regional fuel tax that represents what I consider to be a wholesale redistribution of wealth from some of the poorest people in Auckland who have the least choice to those who actually have the most, the greatest wealth, and who continue to be sustained by the greatest choice. I don't think that's fair, and I'm not going to vote for it. And I accept what my constituents are telling. I don't need Colmar Brunton. I just knock on the door and I listen to my constituents. And I've been doing a lot of that recently. This is not just 10 cents per litre. For my constituents, the combined impact of this proposal, coupled with the government's increase in excise tax, will mean paying an extra 25 cents per litre at the pump. And I'm not going to vote to fast-track my constituents to pay $3 a litre every time they fill up. If we want to be courageous, we would wear the consequences of this via the impact on rates rather than a fuel tax. But that's not an option today. Your Worship, in conclusion, I want to reflect on the person who arguably would have had the most empathy with my argument, but who isn't here today, and I refer, of course, to the late Councillor Dick Quacks. And when I cast my vote today, I might be the only one, I suspect I'll be in the minority, not quite on my own, but I will vote today to reflect my conscience, and I know that Councillor Quacks would have been with me in relation to that matter. I want to acknowledge everyone who has spoken and the right of every councillor and your Worship to exercise your conscience and to vote accordingly. My conscience compels me not to place the greatest burden on those who have the least, and for that reason, and for that reason alone, I will not be supporting the regional fuel tax.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. I also have a concern for those that will be the least able to afford this, and they are the poor people of Auckland, and there are many of those. But equally, this also affects the people in Auckland that are further out, and they include the ward that I represent, and certainly Rodney and further south. And these are the people that proportionally are going to be paying much more, often for a circumstance where they're not always going to see a lot of value. So my real concern, Mr. Mayor, is that we need to have more oversight, in my view, on the transport budget. We're effectively raising the money. As far as Aucklanders are concerned, when they go to the pump, they're going to hold the responsibility for this regional fuel tax to us. But we're giving the money to Auckland Transport to follow through on it. And we need to make sure that we get a maximum of value for money, that it's not going to gold-plated projects, that we're mindful and we're monitoring the impact on people that are further out, people that are least able to afford. So there's a real responsibility on us to follow through and to deliver as much as we can, especially around public transport, and whatever means we can to ensure these people that are going to be very much affected are looked after. That's my real concern. So as much and all as I'm conflicted around this, because there are many projects across the region and in my ward that we benefit from, we've got to do the right thing by people as best we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Yeah, okay. Whawhataimole Avanoa, Talofa Lava. Okay, so this is very difficult, especially hearing Whanana and Councillor Newman's comments. So my ward supports the regional fuel tax. My local board supports the regional fuel tax. My ward, in one particular area, is 87% state housing, and then another particular area, it's over, just so many $1 million properties. So very, very diverse ward. When I'm faced with something difficult, I don't read a book. I go on Facebook, and on Facebook I found this quote, which I think is pretty fitting. A society grows great when old men and women plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. So for me, that confirms what I'm doing here, which is for the future. So I do support the regional fuel tax, but I do want to see more than just talk about how we support those who are going to be hit the hardest by an increase in the petrol tax and the fuel tax. So that is where I'm at. So, yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Mike Lee.
talofa lava, talofa ali'i. I guess I'm the only person in the room that's been through the process of winning support for a regional fuel tax, and that was in 2008, and at the time the Auckland region, backed by a very good business case and a lot of public support, went to the government for government support for electrifying Auckland, electrifying the lines, erecting the catenary, and acquiring the electric rolling stock. At that time, the government of the day had paid for 90% of Wellington's new rolling stock, but we were told there would be no such deal for Auckland, and that if we wanted any support at all, the only way to achieve it was to propose and win support, win public support for a regional fuel tax. And then that money would go to the government, and the government would graciously give it to the Auckland region so that we could electrify our rail network and bring Auckland up to the same level of amenity as, or try to, as other similar cities around the world and in Wellington. We won support for that in our annual plan process. It wasn't easy, but we won clearly. A majority of submitters and feedback supported the idea, and I guess it was because I think it was for 5 cents a litre, and it was for electric trains, no more, no less. That became a little bit more complicated later, thanks to the government. However, a few months later, after the government passed the due legislation, it went out of office and the whole deal was cancelled, and we ended up getting electric trains in the more traditional way, with contribution from the Auckland Council and a contribution from NZTA. I'm just a bit concerned, and I have to say I think I was the only one in the room in 2013 in this chamber when the Auckland Council agreed with the council, with the government, the new government, the national government, repealing the Public Transport Management Act 2008, and therefore taking away the right for regional fuel taxes. So the wheel has turned around, but this time I'm not convinced that we have won the essential support of a clear majority of Aucklanders. The indicators suggest that it's close, but that a significant majority, plurality support, oppose, 51% oppose, 48% oppose, 74% out of 10,000 oppose, and so on. I think the problem here is a lack of trust in the way this council spends money, to be frank, and we have to win over the trust of Aucklanders before we impose another form of taxation on them. I'm not going to rehearse some of the things that have come out in the media in the last 7 or 8 months about spending blowouts and so on. One very recent. We won't go there, but it does underscore, I think, a lack of trust in the way the council is managing the spending and the revenue it already has. And I believe the Mayor campaigned on this point quite vigorously during the election campaign, and people supported him. He was right on that. But I don't think we have won that trust from the people of Auckland. Other colleagues have pointed out the regressive nature of this fuel tax on poorer Aucklanders, on working Aucklanders. This is going to hit them very hard. And if you think they can then, okay, we'll get on to public transport in Auckland, because of AT policy supported by this council, has some of the highest fares of any comparator city in New Zealand, in Australia, in North America. And every year, the fares, they call it fares changing, fares go up. So poorer, lower income Aucklanders, including those many thousands not on a living wage, are going to be impacted negatively by this regional fuel tax. Then we're talking about the benefits, because I can see both sides of this question. It's not an easy one. You know, as I said, I have been a supporter of fuel taxes, but this is not an easy question for any person in this room. There's the 150 million it'll bring in, and that can be leveraged with more money from the government. But we have to ask ourselves, where will that more money come from? It's likely to come, has already been signalled, by another fuel tax on top of that, excise tax on top of that. So rather than our 12.5 cents a litre, it will inevitably, if we're going to leverage, it means we're doing a double whammy. We're doing a double fuel tax, and we didn't go out and consult on that. And I wonder whether 51%, 48%, 74% may have been even higher had the public known that, or during that quite long period of different consultations. Mr. Mayor, the other thing I want to bring up is ATAP. There's a lot of concern about what will happen to ATAP if we don't support this today. ATAP has no statutory basis. ATAP was brought in by the national government to line Auckland up with its priorities, to be frank.
Excuse me, Councillor, I've given you the 2 minutes extension automatically, so can you just bring your comments to a conclusion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a difficult question. I can see the merits in the fuel tax. I respect yourself and the other councillors who support this. However, before I can support it, I have to be convinced of the support of Aucklanders, and to get that support, we have to build trust with the people of Auckland that we are managing their money prudently. And at this stage, that trust, to be frank, is just not there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Greg Sayers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do not support the fuel tax on Rodney's ratepayers to be paying for basic transport projects that should be being provided by Auckland Council anyway. The fuel tax is expected to be spent on providing very basic projects in Rodney, not fancy ones, where the rest of Auckland gets those projects as of right and always have. The Auckland Council should be providing those basic core services to Rodney as it does for the rest of Auckland. Now I'm talking about things such as sealing your road, very basic park and ride, bus services to get people to their doctors and health professionals, even footpaths for the school children to get along to their local schools safely. Now it's not easy standing up against something that's so earnestly supported by the bellows of central government and local government. But Rodney has. It had the opportunity to be consulted on the fuel tax, and it did not support the fuel tax, 56 to 36. So my mandate from that community is fairly clear. Rodney's message is clear. Rodney Council should be providing the same basic transport projects into Rodney as it does for the rest of Auckland, from the rates and the development contributions, which it could and which it should. So, Mr. Mayor, they didn't like the idea of the regional fuel tax. Tolls, rates, development contributions are there to fund basic transport projects. It may have been possible that the extra revenue raising could have been acceptable by the people of Rodney if council efficiencies and savings had been directed into fixing transport issues. The cost of living, due to transport costs of goods going up, because they have to be freighted, is a double whammy for all Aucklanders. And particularly for the rural communities, which have to have their supplies trucked into them. And for the families who have to drive miles just to get to their local school or to their local shop, they will be paying more. Auckland's least resilient ratepayers and residents will bear the greatest burden of a fuel tax, as reinforced by Councillor Collins and Councillor Newman's expressing those concerns in the south. They are the same concerns in the north. The most disgruntled residents in the super city, which is the rural residents of Rodney, will be hit the hardest. In towns like Tahana and Wellsford, very vulnerable towns, are put at more risk as people look to fuel and shop just outside of the Auckland city boundaries. Then on top of that, just when mums and dads were thinking they could get something extra into the shopping cart for the little kiddies, boom, along comes the central government fuel tax on top of that and takes it straight out of their hands. So, Mr Mayor, the alternative really hasn't been raised today and it hasn't been mentioned, and that was the mandate at the elections that Auckland Council would make internal cost savings. We're still waiting to see the efficiency gains of somewhere between 70 and 170 million, i.e. between 3% and 6% efficiency gains, and the procurement efficiency gains as well, which we understand was supposed to be up to about 70 million per year, which haven't been delivered. If they had been, there wouldn't be the need for a fuel tax. Before Council puts the screws onto hard-working citizens of Auckland, maybe it should tighten its own belt first. So look, in conclusion, let's Rodney's message be very clear today. Let me repeat. Auckland Council should be providing those same basic transport projects for Rodney as it does to the rest of Auckland, which are road sealing, footpaths for school children, very basic park and rides, and basic bus services to get people to their doctors and the health professionals. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Sharon Stewart.
Thank you. I support most of the Auckland transport plan, but I am against the light rail to the airport. I believe the bus options preferred by Auckland Transport would be a much better option than the light rail, and I'm just been reading the article that the New Zealand Herald had on the 24th of May about the papers obtained by the Herald under the Official Information Act. They show that definitely the tram bill for 2.5 billion will be much more than if we went with buses. I think that we'd be far better off accelerating the Mill Road and the East West Link and the Pen Link. And the only reasons that we're going down this very expensive fuel tax is it's all smoke and mirrors. A lot of this was done with the new government, and I believe the Mayor must have been having talks with the government. And for a lot of us councillors sitting around this table, we didn't know what the package was going to look like. So so people in my community, most people that I speak to, I don't go to the Facebook or I don't read the book. I actually go out and I speak to the people, and I've been speaking to people of all ages, and most of them are really, really against it. I'm also speaking on behalf of the people that live out in Beachlands and Pine Harbour. The fuel tax is really going to hit them really, really hard. There's over 10,000 people living out that way. And I know that if Councillor Quicks was here today, and I know that he really wanted to be here today, I know that he also wouldn't be supporting the fuel tax, so I won't be supporting the fuel tax. Thank you. And I know that Amity, I've been told about Amity, but if everybody around this table did the right thing, they would do the right things for the right reasons. And I think having a tram from Mount Roskill out to the airport is not the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pennyhouse.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just very briefly, and Councillor Lee raised some of the old history, and I'm just having a look at a Waitakere City Development Committee meeting agenda from the 3rd of April 2003, 15 years ago. Some of the people who might be interested in this debate were not even born yet. And we passed, in support of the regional planning for this, a recommendation to pursue regional fuel tax with urgency, and to the proposal for funding the completion of the transport network for Auckland region by 2010. So, failure on that score. And I think, Mr Mayor, you know, I want to acknowledge Councillor Bartley's eloquent words, and I'm afraid my words aren't going to be as eloquent. I'm going to quote Yoda. You know, there is no try, there's only do or not do. And, you know, we're talking a lot about this, and we've talked, I've been on council now for coming up for 28 years. We've talked endlessly about the regional land transport plans, and this is our time to do. So fundamentally, our most vulnerable regions, our most vulnerable communities, and the people we're talking about with passion are the ones who've done the worst out of our lack of action. You know, it is the West and the South. Admittedly, we pushed hard and we've got rail to both these areas, but my God, we could do with some buses, we could do with some safety, exactly as Councillor Cooper so eloquently put it. And while we look at the short-termism and aren't prepared to plant that tree that we'll never sit under, our people continue to suffer. This is our opportunity to do, and I think we should. So thank you, Mr Mayor, for giving us the opportunity to finally do something for Auckland. This report that I'm looking at calls for raising $5 billion. This was in 2003. We didn't get that. We now have to spend $28 billion, and by saying no today, we say no to that $28 billion. No to the road ceiling, no to the safety, no to the increased buses, no to the implementation of public transport for our vulnerable communities, no to the whole lot. And quite frankly, I think that's nuts. I'm not going to sit at yet another meeting and say no to decent transport for Auckland. I've done that since.
Just excuse my voice, it's not as good as it used to be. But I'll still get the words out, hopefully.
Good on you.
Basically, I lived and was bred in Manurewa, poor area, and it's still poor today. We give the people a wage increase and we take it back in fuel tax. So we're not actually giving them any reason. This fuel tax is going to be a burden on the economy. It's going to be a burden on people. Sure, it might allow us to get a lot of things done, but at the end of the day, this just creates more congestion. So for that reason, I can't support it. I've listened to my constituents. I've listened to the board of Manurewa and Councillor Newman as well. And they don't want us to vote for it. So at the end of the day, what's the use having a board in your local area if you don't go by the wishes of the people? People that don't want this, there's an extra cost to them. So for that reason, I can't support it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Councillor Rosklow.
I wasn't going to speak, but I suppose I reflected it would be inappropriate if neither of the chair or the deputy chair of the finance committee spoke, and Councillor Simpson can't speak. So, but look, I'll be brief. I can't say I've wrestled with this. To me, there simply are no other alternatives. I mean, I hear what my colleague from Rodney talks about, and obviously his theme is slash, cut, burn, reduce, all sorts of other things. That's not feasible. We have made significant efficiency gains with the Super City. We have made significant gains in strategic procurement. We're running an increasingly leaner and meaner ship and doing this right, and we're getting the priorities. My ward is actually one of the poorest wards as well. It's a very transient ward, and people, and the figures show there's not a heck of a lot of difference between the Fau and Otara Papatoetoe. However, it would be wrong of me to vote against this, given that the Fau has actually benefited from previous investments. I look at the double tracking and the electrification out to the west of the train services. I look at the 430 million that has been spent in New Lynn and the Transit Orient Centre, the biggest project, even bigger than Britomart to date, that was made on the behalf of the Waitakere Council, then Auckland Council, but also a Labour government, then a national government, putting in between them 130 million of that 430. And then I look at the decision and already the budgeted and provided for CRL that is going in, that is going to be of huge benefit to people out west especially, but also the south, and it's going to improve times. Hopefully we can keep fares down, but it's going to make a big difference. And then I look at the fundamental thing that's going to be, or the two fundamental things that are going to be delivered through this is increased public transport, which is again where those that are going to be hit hardest in the pocket, and I know some people have to take a car to cross town or whatever to get to work, but basically public transport does help those that have less income more than it helps those who have the ability and decision to take motor vehicles all the time. So I just, for me to say no to this tax now because, hey, West Auckland we've got, and my ward's already got good things, Avondale's got a new station, Newland's got a new station, we've got the CRL, we've got double tracking, and generally things are pretty good, and I can't, and after this budget, if it all goes through, if I'm the councillor going forward for the Fau ward, I mean there's very little I can ask for the Fau in the future, because we're in good shape compared to, I will say, many parts of the south which are terribly neglected by previous councils, and especially by the previous Auckland City Council, where the south was starved. So I will be supporting this, and I know it's really difficult for a number of people to get behind this, and I take my hat off to you, Josephine. I think I got the impression you're going to vote for it, but it's not an easy decision for you, so I take my hat off to you. But I just think, just councillors, for those who maybe just thinking, oh, what should I do? What are the alternatives? What are the alternatives? We've had this government, and I'm not bagging the last government at all, but the last government was not really offering a heck of a lot of help. We have a new government, and it isn't made up of one party, it's made up of three. And they have just decided to reprioritise, and that Auckland gets a lot of benefit. And they're seeing Auckland and the rural economy as being the drivers of our economy. So I think we should grasp, it would be foolish if we turned our back on this opportunity to make huge advances, we hope, and allow us to actually get to the stage where we can move to more demand pricing and move away from a fuel tax and do that more sensible demand management and tolling type situations. So I will be voting for this.
Thank you very much, Councillor. We now come to the end of this debate. I'm not going to speak at any great length because I suspect everybody around the table, almost everybody, has spoken and indicated a position. But I just want to make a couple of points very clear. Resolution, the recommendation A, votes for us to enable us to transform our transport system in Auckland and address years of underinvestment and to address growing congestion and gridlock. The option to approving A is to gut our budget and effectively to rip the heart out of ATAP. We've heard from officials that if we don't have this, it won't even be business as usual. It will be renewals, what we've already committed to, and nothing new. And our city would grind to a halt. I know it's a hard decision, and I know it's even harder for some of those people that have said yes to this proposal. It's easy to say no to it. If you think it's going to go through, that's a comfortable position to be in. It's a lot harder to say, yes, actually, we understand this has to happen. And if it doesn't happen, the consequences are pretty awful. And actually, there's one thing that the public of Auckland are near unanimous on: we can't do nothing. We've got to do something. And scratch under any of the no's in that consultation, talk to the people, and I do my share of talking to the people. I work 7 days a week at it. They say, of course you've got to do something. Of course you need more revenue. Don't necessarily like it, but you've got to do it. Just scratch under the surface. That's what those people will tell you. It's easy to spend more, and we'll go into the next session, and everybody will be voting for where we're spending more, I suspect, and some of you will be voting to tell us to spend more again. We can't spend anything without revenue. And there is no option in these recommendations. It's either we raise the extra revenue, we spend the extra 4.3, and add to that the extra couple of billion that the government has put in through the National Land Transport Fund. If we look like we don't have the courage to take some hard decisions and to put some, I accept what John Watson said, we are putting skin in the game. I'm not reflecting on Aucklanders at all, John, but I'm simply saying the rest of New Zealand expects us to meet a further share of this, and if we don't, it won't be matched by matching funds from government, and the government is not likely actually to want to put in the extra money. There's a strong political movement around this country that says we're sick of putting money into Auckland. I don't agree with it, but I don't deny that that is the sentiment out there, and that governments of all shades respond to it. I want to emphasise a point that I didn't, but Councillor Darby did. This is as much about housing as it is about transport. If we can't put the money into transport infrastructure, we can't build the new houses either in terms of brownfield intensification or greenfields. The last point I want to make is come back to the point about equity. The critical expenditure item in ATAP, the new direction of ATAP, is public transport and active modes of transportation. Yes, we do the critical stuff in roading. We have to do that. We have to do the mill roads. Not sure how we're going to pay for Mill Road or Penlink or Lincoln Road, or we certainly won't be doing the ceiling, but thanks for your earlier suggestion, Councillor Sayers. But the critical thing is public transport. Who uses public transport? The old, who generally have a lower income, the young, including students, who generally have lower income, disabled people who can't get around by themselves and they rely on public transport, and those who can't afford to run a car. And more, cars are really expensive. We all know that. With all the costs involved with it, we've got to have a decent public transport system. This package immensely improves our public transport system. And yes, when petrol prices go up, it hurts people. Unfortunately, probably 3/4 of the petrol prices we'll see have got nothing to do with government or local council. They're currency movements and they're political factors. I think, Councillor Newman, you mentioned the impact of the Trump policies. We are only responsible for this 10 cents. But that 10 cents actually delivers a huge return. And the people who are paying the 10 cents, I believe, will be getting many times that back directly in targeted payments to low income. And I absolutely support what the government's done in that area. But they'll get it back too if we've got a decent public transport system that enables people that struggle to pay for petrol in their car to get around. Now, I don't think I need to ask if there needs to be a division. I think we should take this vote by division, and I will now ask officers to conduct a vote, the two parts of the resolution, to approve the regional fuel tax proposal and to delegate for minor edits. Could you please take a roll call?
Mayor Goff.
Yes.
Councillor Bartley.
For.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Yes.
Councillor Clow.
Yes.
Councillor Collins.
Against.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Filipina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes.
Councillor Hills.
Yes.
Councillor Hulse.
Aye.
Councillor Lee.
No.
Councillor Newman.
Against.
Councillor Sayers.
Against.
Councillor Simpson.
Against. Oh, was that against?
Councillor Stewart.
No.
Councillor Sir John Walker.
No.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
Sorry to stop the run, guys. Yes.
13 to 7.
Okay, so I declare that passed by 13 to 7. Thank you to all of the councillors who contributed to that debate. I think it was a debate from the heart, from people on all sides. Can I now adjourn this meeting? We'll come back after finance and performance and suggest maybe we have a 5-minute break before we get into finance and performance. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.